Good morning, Ashan. Welcome to the Ashan Breakfast Call of the 19th March 2014. Today is a good Wednesday, and we have Zain HD, who is from a local NGO here, Peace Meal, with us today. Hi, Zain.
Hi, good morning.
Zain HD, really? Is it high definition?
No, it's just, I went to a few schools and a few sports. So typically when, you're a teenager, when you join these sort of things, each team will give you a nickname. So Zain HD was one of the nicknames that I got when I was playing basketball.
Yeah. But why HD? What does it stand for?
I don't know. Some people say it's high definition. Some people say it's hidong because I got a big nose. Some people say it's, I don't know. There's a number of versions. In the end, it became a bit more mysterious. There's a number of nicknames like Jang and when I played rugby, it was a different nickname. When I was in this other school, it was a different nickname. Anyway, that's just how boys in Malaysia, in some parts, I guess, behave.
Right. Yeah. I asked this because our colleague asked me yesterday. Is it HD for high definition?
When I played another sport, when I played campus basketball, at one point my nickname was New York. Like, it was not even a name of a person, it's like a name of a city. Like, you're New York, okay. So it's a lot of funny things. Like, I know one guy in uni, he was called Bicycle Rims. Like, his nickname was literally Bicycle Rims. So anyway, these are just how
boys and their nicknames.
It's very funny how it goes.
All right. So today we have a few news pieces from all across the ASEAN region. So the first news comes from Thailand, talking about how universities are leading the way to an ASEAN bloc. So these news pieces come from Nation Multimedia, talking about how Thailand universities are prepping their students for ASEAN bloc integration. So what they're talking about is that they are instituting a lot of exchanges, sponsoring a lot of scholarship students to go to different destinations in ASEAN countries. But however, they also noted that it seems like right now a lot of students are reluctant of going to ASEAN countries and would rather apply for scholarship to go to South Korea, Japan, or Europe, But upon returning from, for example, food science scholarship in Indonesia, they came to change their attitude about ASEAN, and because they returned with a lot of knowledge and a lot of business contacts, and they realized how they could be movers and shakers in this region in the future. So that's coming from Thailand. I think that we were also sharing how local university students in Malaysia tend to look down upon ASEAN as well.
That happens.
Yeah, and they would prefer to go to all these class 3 countries.
I think what's interesting about Thailand is that I think is in the primary school or in the secondary school or maybe both. Mm-hmm. A portion of the national budget actually goes into the education policy, educating kids in public school about ASEAN.
Oh.
So they're the first country in ASEAN to do that.
Right.
So that shows how serious the government and the central government in Thailand is doing that. Although some people might somewhat argue that, maybe part of the reason why Thailand is a bit more pushy in this area is because there's less usage of English, so that means the medium of communication with the rest of ASEAN is a bit limited. So when you are that behind, if you look at it from that perspective, behind in that sense, there is even a stronger push or stronger desire or stronger need to kind of, what do we do to catch up? Hence why I think they're a bit more serious. Okay, look, we got to, really put this out to the public education and not, so I think what we're seeing here in this university part is more of like a continuity from that national policy of having a portion of the school syllabus teaching ASEAN integration. I think they teach culture, language, and what else I'm not too sure myself. Yeah.
So we also noticed the trend while we are monitoring the news is that especially Thailand and also Philippines, there tends to be a lot of focus on ASEAN, and especially a lot of preparation in different industries. Like for example, the next ones come from Visayan Daily, talking about how the Department of Trade and Industry in Philippines are getting fully prepared. And in fact, they said that they are already fully prepared for ASEAN integration. And I cannot say the same for Malaysia, because we have been monitoring the news, but there seems to be like little or almost none, mentions about industry getting ready for ASEAN and universities getting ready.
It's slightly worrying because I think Malaysia is going to be the chair for ASEAN in 2015. And at the same time, in 2015, we will likely take the seat for the United Nations Security Council. And then 2015 is also the year the AAC comes to life, supposedly. So it's quite a big year.
What council?
The AEC, the United Nations Security Council.
Security Council.
Malaysia's going to take seat in the UNSC. So as a whole, the foreign policy in the Malaysian side is becoming very important in 2015. Now, I think generally speaking, if it's coming in 2015, then typically things would begin to happen now, even from last year. Maybe they are happening, but there's something that is not so highlighted in the media, or something that is not, say,
at all
media-centric, meaning things are happening maybe in the policy level that we're not seeing, and it will come to life when it comes. But yes, it's very specifically for Malaysia compared to the other ASEAN countries. It's quite key. I think we'll see some things coming out this year, next year. Hopefully.
So in Malaysia, some insights of what the local media talk about, for example, is a news piece from a drug related deaths at music festival, where our youth and sports minister Khairi is trying to de-link himself of certain claims that he's connected to the organizers of the future music festival in Malaysia. And one thing to note is that Khairi is also involved in some of the episodes on MH370. So what happened is that we have do you call them shamans, right? Shamans.
Oh, is it?
The Bomo.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Probably that's the right translation.
So he was, Khairi was commenting about how the Bomo should be arrested by the religious authorities. And in return, the Bomo said that I would slap him like a crocodile.
Apparently I got some context. Do you know why he said that? Slap him like a crocodile?
No.
Because apparently this particular shaman, this Bomo, his main credibility, his main credentials to indicate how amazing he is because he once slapped a crocodile to death.
Oh.
Yeah, so he actually slapped the crocodile once and that crocodile died.
Oh.
So hence why there's this connection with crocodile. So like, wow, this guy must be amazing. He slapped a crocodile and he died.
Right.
So hence why saying that, okay, Khairi, I'm going to slap a crocodile, meaning I'll slap you till you die. No, I'll slap you once. No, not like multiple slaps. Like apparently that one slap killed the crocodile. So I'm going to do you like what I did to the crocodile. So that was why the whole reference was used. So it's not like plucked out of thin air.
That makes more sense now.
Because he didn't, someone explained this to me. I said, oh, okay, no, I understand that.
Right, okay. So, but I think what we'll do is actually we'll comment a little about the drug, issue first.
Yes.
And then we'll go into this, whole, crocodile episode, yeah? Cause I think both of them are linked a little to religious, issues in Malaysia. Like, for example, on the drug issue, supposedly in Malaysia, you will hear if you are ever on whether is it an MH flight or any airlines flight that coming into Malaysia, that drugs carries a death penalty in Malaysia. Yeah.
I think that could be a legal requirement. I'm quite sure I've heard it somewhere in another airline in another country, and not just Malaysia.
Right.
But
Singapore.
some people have commented how odd it is. Here for one, they always have this line where it says, for foreign nationals, welcome to Malaysia, and for Malaysians arriving, welcome home. And then 2 minutes later, there's a statement,
Yeah.
the drug penalty carries a death offense. Oh, wow. The offense carries a death penalty. But I don't think so. It classifies for all types of drugs. And then there's an amount issue. Like, a lot of people don't know that typically when you catch someone with a bag of drugs, let's just say, hypothetically, it's about, say, a bag of, say, 100 grams. The charge might only come up to something much, much less than that. Because typically by the time that drug goes to the lab, whatever dehydration comes through, so the actual content of the drug is much less. So hence why sometimes when you hear people get caught for drugs, very few of them actually end up with the full charge or with the full punishment. Because it's not the qualified amount to give that person that death penalty or whatever penalty it is. And that's why also some people get caught for drugs end up not getting convicted, because by the time the whole process is completed, sometimes just by nature of how the labs work, by that time the drug may have somewhat disappeared, or because it's become so small, dehydration, all this comes into factor.
That's pretty intense knowledge. Of
but you see, the other thing is, because I've spoken to a guy from the, I don't know, is it called forensic side, but you see the point being, I think why the emphasis of why some airlines or the government may choose to make it a mandatory announcement in the planes is because it is not illegal in some countries. So some people might argue, hey, I didn't know it was illegal here, so hence why the need to emphasize when you arrive in a plane, hey, it is illegal, so you can't say I didn't know. Even though it's not their duty to inform you. I mean, some people might make that claim as a defense. So maybe that's why, as unpleasant as it sounds.
But I think that criminalizing drugs is also another issue, because it's not just the only headline that we saw in Malaysia. Even in a music festival in Jakarta, similarly, youth are dying from drug overdose, and most of them, whether it's in Malaysia's music festival and Jakarta, it seems like they are Singaporeans. And I wonder, this has anything to do with how, if you were to criminalize something, you actually get a stronger reaction from your citizens, and that's why most of this staff have been Singaporeans. Do you think that's the way to go?
You mean the kids that died in Malaysia were Singaporeans?
Yeah, a lot of them.
Okay.
Or wait, is it one of them? One. Okay, one of them who died. Yeah.
Okay. This is something quite interesting. I was hanging out with this guy from... Oh,
sorry, I just need to add on. A lot of them are being charged, but one died. And
right.
Like, a lot of them who are being charged are Singaporeans.
Yeah. Like this one, I was talking to this one guy. He's from the States. He's based in the UK. He's a permaculture instructor. And he was saying about how, it's interesting that if he's American. So he says, and he's aware that people around the world envy America, meaning the public, for their lives. And I'm not saying a lot of people, but in contrast, America tends to always be the place where people want to be or want to live in or start a life in. And he says, look, if America is the place that has everything, then why do we have the highest drug problem in the world? So he says, so clearly there's something wrong. Now, putting aside the legal issue for a moment, we've got to ask ourselves, then why are people turning to drugs to begin with? So is it that the system that is being created around us today facilitates a desire or need for an escape, and hence that escape becomes drugs? So that I think is one issue. From an issue, now I come from an NGO that does work within the purview of with the connection of Islam. I think with regards to legalizing drugs and non-legalizing drugs, I think because the law from a religious perspective is understood as something quite set, so it's not subject to, say, popular belief, or say one day we should legalize it, one day we shouldn't legalize it.
Okay.
And I think we mentioned this before the show. But what I was getting to that point is that what's wrong is wrong and what's right is right, and that's said. There are some things that are grey.
Okay.
And
drugs are?
Drugs are quite clearly wrong.
Okay.
As far as the religion understands. Just like how, imagine, say, 200 years from now, people are discussing, is murder okay or not? Can you imagine that? So when we talk about whether drugs should be legalized or not, it might not sound shocking to us, but for some people who are very clear with what divine laws are, that's just an insane discussion. Just as how it is insane to also say, should murder be legal or not? Imagine some people, I know that's a far-fetched thing to say, but now the third point that we mentioned earlier about this is about, imagine there's economic interest within legalizing this legally because of how taxing works. Basically, just to put context to the listeners, what Vienna and I were discussing was basically, when you have income tax, so income tax only taxes income which are legal and declared, whereas there's a lot of illegal dealings that happen in any country which is not taxed. So why are people obeying the law getting taxed for their income, and the people not obeying the law not getting taxed for their income? So what some countries do is that they remove or they reduce income tax and they go for GST. So when people spend money, that's when they get taxed. Now, the illegal people who earn money illegally are also spending money legally. So that's where they try to tax them. And sometimes countries make more money that way than taxing the income tax. Yeah. So you tax the expenditure. So sometimes there's a reason why countries would push for legalizing drugs. Sometimes, I'm saying. I'm not sure who. I'm just saying.
I wonder if that would happen in Malaysia though. Because it seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, but religious influence is really strong.
It is. Yeah, it is.
And like, for example, in this, let's go back to the episode on MH370. Yeah. So, Bomo practices a kind of shamanism. Yeah. And, if you have seen some videos on on the practice, which would basically consist of, carrying coconuts, bamboo binoculars, and, some, I don't know what you call them.
I was...
Yeah. So, but anyway, I personally think that they should have the freedom to practice, religion or whatever faith that they believe in. Yeah. And also, the Bomo actually mentioned that this youth minister should not try to seek publicity from using me. Let me do my work of locating the plane. Don't classify what I do as haram. Meet me first. Yeah. So, and even like before the court, before delivering a verdict on the case. Yeah. So, I'm curious though, because in Malaysia we have this issue of, not, let's say you're never going to be able to convert out of Islam. Yeah. So, and does this prohibit a shaman from practicing what he once practiced? Can he be charged in a Sharia court?
See, I don't know to what extent does he even fall. Is there even a law within the Sharia court? I'm not even sure to address these sort of characters. Number one. Number two, we also don't know whether I can't say from a Sharia point of view that what he was doing was wrong or right.
Oh, okay.
Number three, from a cultural point of view, this practice or this application of a shaman is extremely wide.
Right.
I think we would be foolish to pretend that this is the first time you're seeing a shaman being engaged. So, I mean, he is there because he was asked to be there. Let's be fair. Clearly somebody asked him to be there. Whoever that person or party might be, that's besides the point, because he was given a platform and he was not interrupted and whatever, right? I know for a fact that a lot of the concerts, a lot of the big events in Malaysia, even the small events, they engage a shaman to help and say, divert rain. So some people say, they either move away rain or they hold back rain. Now, whether or not it's true, the interesting thing is that a lot of people who call the Muslim shamans, they're non-Muslims. And some of them even call non-Muslim shamans or Muslim shamans of other faith. So now from a Muslim point of view, from an Islamic point of view, that's problematic. The moment you believe that these powers come from the shamans and not from God. But that's a separate issue. And that's an issue that I'm not even sure the Sharia court can legally handle. They might not agree with it, but it's actually a statute that says, hey, this is under this law, But I think from another perspective, we can talk about is that maybe because we live in the social media freedom of expression world, is obsessed with this area of life of expressing, maybe we need to realize that some things are just not meant for public. Do presidents meet in public? They don't. They meet behind closed doors. So some work that is being done, it should be done behind closed doors. So the question begs then, whether it's the shaman or the people who call the shaman for the MH incident, why were they doing it in public sphere just like that? What was preventing them from doing it in an enclosed space, or preventing the organizers organizing a room for them and say, okay, you want to do your stuff, do it here in this room. If you feel you can help us, okay, you do whatever you want to do. But to do it in front of a spectacle in an extremely hypersensitive situation, where if tomorrow if I go on public and I say, hey, I think I found a plane, I can actually get 200 people to listen to me, because we're dealing in a hypersensitive situation. So, and he's saying something as like, don't use me to get publicity. And people are actually taking that statement seriously and reporting that. So it's very interesting. So I think it's because the situation is very hypersensitive that anything he's saying is being reported. And suddenly Kyrie's supposed interest to take publicity has something to do with his criticism towards the shaman, as opposed to his criticism to the shaman is because, well, you're embarrassing everyone.
Kyrie's claiming the opposite. He's saying that, he after that he responded with ridiculing the shaman, of course, and saying that I think the whole Malaysians population want to slap him,
which I think is wrong as well.
I was like, what is this? What a youth and sports minister says? And of course, the Bomo also claimed that he was called by a government leader to help with the search and rescue mission. So, and we often see him decked in a coat wearing a One Malaysia pink, which is the official logo for the administration that's headed by Najib, right? So he says that if this drags on, we'll send a memorandum to Najib together with all 500,000 Silat members. And Silat is it's a form of martial arts, in the Malay culture.
That has some connection to shamanism,
So, and I'll probably just sum this up as saying this is another day of politics in Malaysia where we are entertained endlessly.
I think, there's politics in other places as well that it operates in a similar way, or operates in a similar, if we in one format can call it a circus, where there's multiple sides that can benefit. I think there was one guy in the US Congress, I can't remember his name, but I think Obama was talking about the Medicare, and out of nowhere he broke the decorum by standing up and say, "You liar," or you're a liar. He screamed at Obama and said that. And then because of that, he got kicked out of the session and got banned or suspended for a few months. Now check this out. Because of what he did, he got a lot of funding. Because he was that guy that stood up to Obama and called him a liar and embarrassed Obama. So there's people that stand to benefit from negative outcomes. In this case, I don't know, it could be Kyrie, it could be whoever. But you know that this statement that Kyrie made about a lot of people wanting to slap the guy is, we could say that it's undiplomatic, but it does resonate with a lot of people. A lot of people do want to slap the shaman. And a lot of people do want to slap Kyrie as well. So, I think the slapping thing has gotten a bit, the point being is that people just don't agree with it lah. Apparently slapping now,
So moving on from a more mature politics than slapping each other, we have news coming from Vietnam talking about how Japanese businesses were to expand their existing operations in Vietnam. So we will contrast this with another news piece from Myanmar talking about how China would want to invest more, but it seems that it has been met with opposition in Myanmar because in Myanmar they have built a lot of different projects. For example, copper mines and dams and hydropower projects, all pipeline and nickel mine. That's all sponsored by Chinese investors.
Wow.
Yeah, money is pouring in. So, but I think one of the contrasting point, perhaps in Myanmar case, is that it has been compared even to the situation of Crimea in the Ukraine crisis. So talking about how China is trying to have a foothold in one of Myanmar's state, which is the Wa state that's close to China, and which a lot of them actually speaks Chinese, and it seems to be under Chinese influence. And in fact, the United Wa State Army is one of the most powerful armies among the ethnic armed groups that is currently receiving Chinese aid, as claimed by 11myanmar.com. Yeah, so we're just wondering, like, why is it that Japan was seen to be welcomed in Vietnam, whereas in Myanmar, citizens are not happy about the development that China is undergoing? Maybe because in Vietnam and Japan's case, though, it's also similar in the sense of how Japan is providing a lot of developmental aid. But I guess there are a lot of reasons why it's seen as a very different entity that provokes different responses.
Yeah, I think unlike, I don't know how diverse is Vietnam, but I know that Myanmar is extremely diverse in terms of multiple groups, right? Mm-hmm. So, you know, when you're playing with Myanmar in that sense, you might be fighting for influence by tapping into that diversity and sometimes using that diversity for negative outcomes. Well, negative towards, you know, some parties there, but beneficial to other parties. Whereas Vietnam, I don't think so, deals with such a diverse thing. Like you could see ethnic armed groups. Like I don't think so you hear that term in Vietnam.
You have one party.
Yeah, you got one party, and then but in Myanmar you do. And plus, unlike Myanmar, Vietnam is very well to do in the economic sense. Right? I think Vietnam is quite high up there within the economic index in the ASEAN region, whereas Myanmar is still trying to open up. And then the other part I think that maybe is worthy to mention is if you consider Japan's foreign policy contrasted to China's foreign policy. China is still linked to a largely military-looking state, whereas Japan is not so. And then you consider how erratic China's foreign policy is compared to Japan's more consistent foreign policy. So I think that raises concern. I think generally anything about China going to anywhere raises concern. Just like how it used to raise a lot of concerns when America used to go into anywhere. People get a bit concerned, hey, what's going on here, what they're doing there. But that said, even when people raising those questions for US, their foreign policy was still a bit more consistent than what China's foreign policy is. So I think that the concern also stems from that.
Right, but I think that currently ASEAN is facing, let's say, a problem of trying to balance all this global superpowers are. You know? Yeah. So, trying to balance the influence of China, of the US, namely, and of course we haven't seen Russia coming in. But I know that from our news monitoring that a lot of trade deals are being done even with the Middle East region right now, Iran, a lot, and this has historical backgrounds in how the ASEAN region have been largely non-aligned. But now we'll be looking at possibly, I don't know if it will be a torn region, but the fact that Philippines is heavily influenced by the US, and then we now see that Myanmar is heavily influenced by China, and of course we have Thailand who. Yeah. And
also I think to keep in mind that, so you have Vietnam, which has a strong coast on that side, right? They've got a big coast, whereas Myanmar is landlocked, right?
No, they have some coast too.
Or they do have some coast, right?
Yeah.
Now, Japan is also in this tug of war thing with the Koreans and with Chinese.
Right.
In the South China Sea. So they are also trying to probably gain a more foothold in that region, specific region, and not ASEAN as a whole, but that specific area. And at the same time, from Japan's interest in Vietnam is also largely businesses, whereas if you compare, since we're comparing with China and Myanmar, is very infrastructure based. Now that's, you're not just putting businesses and population at your mercy should you choose to exercise it that way, but you're putting governments in that context. And it's the government that is still, like I said, trying to pick up. I was just in Myanmar, mid last year to do a report on the situation with the Rohingyas and there's some conflict there, and you could see that it's still a very backward place, and I don't think so. Vietnam is in because when you talk about Vietnamese or the Vietnam scene in Malaysia, a lot of people who are in the startup scene. Vietnam, I've been told, have a strong startup scene with the tech side on one end, and some people who are working in the advertising industries, the creative of people. Sometimes when they want to leave Malaysia, Vietnam is one of the places they look at. Vietnam, Singapore, Hong Kong.
Oh.
So you could see that, in that sense, Vietnam has a totally different thing going on. If you're attracting foreign talent of such nature, then it must be something.
It's surprising. I didn't know that along with Singapore and Hong Kong, Vietnam is now the go-to scene for startup.
Startup and advertising and creative minds, and people are going there.
Wow, okay.
And you don't hear that about Myanmar at all. So you're playing with and then Myanmar is dealing with someone huge like China, and then Vietnam is only dealing with someone like Japan, who is across the coast and not a coastal, not a border-to-border kind of neighbor, we have the sea to separate us, so it's a bit more different.
Well, of course, something to note is that the officials from both sides have denied of such financial support from China, arming some of the, like I mentioned, the United Wa State Army, yeah? So now let's move on to something more cultural. We have Singapore, who wants to hold their own Songkran festival. As this is a post from Bangkok Post talking about how Songkran is traditionally celebrated by Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, and Myanmar, as well as ethnic groups in Vietnam, China, Sri Lanka, and India. It means a transition to a new year. Originally, they used to pour water gently on their family members and neighbors as part of transition to traditional New Year in the middle of summer. But nowadays, young people participate in it as a form of a water splashing event that will bring in tourists. So although traditionally it's meant to seek blessings from senior citizens and remember their ancestors. So a lot of people are talking about, is this a kind of cultural, cultural theft, stealing from your neighbor's country's culture? I mean, we know a lot of disputes between Malaysia and Indonesia happen like that back then, especially in the height of confrontasi. Then talking about how Malaysia is just stealing cultural identity.
I think it's important to know, like in the 60s, and the 70s, Malaysians were seen by Indonesians as a very uncultured lot. In the 70s, thereabouts, and it's not quite far off, I think, if you consider to how much culture that is being lived and practiced in Indonesia and compare that to Malaysia. It's not an inaccurate thing, I think. You look at how developed their batik is compared to our batik. From an outcome point of view, like how intricate their batik are, how lively that industry is, how often it is worn. They don't need. So in Malaysia, we have every Thursday people are recommended to wear batik or suggested to wear batik, or it becomes more appropriate. And Thursdays you wear batik, to the point that when I wear batik on Mondays, people ask me, "Hey, why are you wearing batik? It's not Thursday." In Indonesia, they don't have any of that because people are just wearing batik all the time. Over here, we're more obsessed about, say, wearing a shirt from, I don't know, Raoul or some Western brand and a suit and a coat. Whereas over there is a bit more balance, assuming that's the word. So that was in the 70s. And we know that in the 80s and the 90s and after that, Malaysians look down on Indonesians from an economic point of view. Like, foreign workers and maids. That's what they understood. And only in the late 90s did you see, back from the artistic side, Indonesian bands and films were coming to Malaysia, and suddenly the 15-year-olds and the 12-year-olds, the middle-class kids and the 18-year-olds were watching and following Indonesian drama, Indonesian independent film, and suddenly and I could see that a lot of people, young people who used to talk down about Indonesians, who used to look at their mates differently, suddenly now looked at it differently, like, oh wow, yeah, you're from Indonesia, oh yeah, I just saw this film that day, it's from Indonesia. These things were not there before. And you used to not see so many Indonesian bands performing in Malaysia. Now you do. Now, that affects a lot for the younger kids, because now when they become 30-year-olds and 40-year-olds corporate people, they would not look at Indonesians as how their elders or people in half the generation above them previously saw Indonesians. So there's been this shift between Indonesia and Malaysia. But I think the bigger, I don't know if you call it a stepbrother sort of relationship, happened more between Malaysia and Singapore. Just to put some context to listeners out there. So I think this comment that comes about Songkran and has that. I just thought I want to add in a little something, which is whenever we speak about culture, it tends to relate to religion. Like someone made a comment once, the strip club culture in strip club in the US is a culture. It is a culture. That's it. I mean, whether you want to see it that way. Do we see, a lot of people go to Thailand, and one of the things they always talk about, did you go into these massage places where there's prostitution and there's lady boys and whatnot? Is that too not part of culture? Do we always peg culture to what the Westerners see as something exotic? Is that all what it is to culture? So when people, because a lot of people always say Singapore doesn't have any culture, I would disagree with that. Because the problem is that we've understood culture to be this thing where it's got to be Chinese New Year, or it's got to be Hari Raya, like how the Muslims celebrate it. It's got to be something like that.
Exotically.
Yeah, exotic
yours.
and religiously pegged. Like in the UK, after work, they go to the pub. Is that not culture? Is that not cultural? So I think I'm definitely not qualified to discuss the definitions and understanding of culture, but there's this thing in terms of how we always define culture as something being old, connected to tradition, and anything that is not connected to that thus become not cultured.
And you were mentioning a bit about Big Brother, because I'm rather curious. So you are talking about how Singapore is Big Brothering Malaysia.
No, like a stepbrother relation.
Stepbrother, sorry.
Stepbrother relation. Like we're always talking about how we're doing in comparison to them. What are they doing in relation to us? Right. There's less care about how Malaysia is doing with Indonesia, even though by ethnicity or by blood or by origin there's more connection to us and them.
Not necessarily. In fact, a lot of Singaporeans are previously Malaysians. Like my relatives, they are in Singapore.
Correct. But there's also a lot of, in terms of what Singapore is today, as a matter of, say, you're living in a Malaysia today that is very heightened with religious identity, and that religious identity is most commonly found in Indonesia with Malaysia. So it's okay. I'll give you an example. It's interesting that the University Technology Mara, which is 99% made up of Malay Muslims, and in a time where even in that university they are talking about Muslim identities in whatever ways, that university, from what I last remembered, does not have an institute for Indonesian studies. And Indonesia is the largest Muslim population in the world. That is also their neighbor. There is also 2 million Indonesians working in Malaysia, and yet the largest Muslim university in Malaysia does not have an institute for Indonesian studies in that campus. So you can see that the relations only exist largely from a non-formal, from a ground level lah. It's non-formal, non-institutionalized. So even at that level, we don't have that relationship. So it's very odd, but we are sometimes more concerned with what's happening in Singapore. And, I remember when I was 20 years ago, I remember there was this silly talk about, Singapore always has their tanks positioned pointing towards Malaysia. Yeah. Have you heard this before? Yeah.
Yes.
Well, now nobody has ever confirmed this, whether it's true or not. But it goes around. We've forgotten. I've not heard that sort of talk for 15 years now, but I clearly remember many years ago I used to hear this a lot. So anyway, there's this I think behavior that we always tend to look at Singapore in a certain way, and also at culture. Like a lot of people always say, Singapore doesn't have any culture. When you ask them, what do you mean? Like over here, we have Chinese New Year, we have this, we have that. So does that mean Singapore doesn't have any culture if they don't have that? So it's a bit sad lah. And also let's be fair, Singapore is the richest, I think, ASEAN country, right? By GDP per capita. Okay, yeah. But Brunei doesn't really churn out anything it's all relied upon natural resources and not something that they actually built upon. So I think there's this thing that people like to take a pick on Singapore a bit more than other people, I think. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for tuning in to ASEAN Breakfast Call. Later, we'll have a session with Zain talking about religion and interfaith issue. Do stay tuned. See you after the break.